Well, Dr. Sachs is a retired justice of the Constitutional Court of South Africa, a position to which he was appointed by President Nelson Mandela in 1994. He's also the recipient of some dozen honorary doctoral degrees from all corners of the world, including USC in 2011. Dr. Sachs was an early and longtime activist for human rights and the overthrow of apartheid rule in South Africa, joining the struggle at age 17 during the early 1950s. As a young lawyer, during this turbulent and often violent period, he devoted his practice to the defense of those who were often charged under the racist and repressive laws of the country. As a result, he was harassed by the security police and twice placed in solitary confinement without trial. In 1966, he went into exile, spending more than 2 decades studying and teaching law in England and Mozambique, and eventually became the target of a state-sponsored assassination attempt, which left him critically injured at the time. During the 1980s, he began to work with Oliver Tambo, leader of the ANC, the African National Congress, for those of you who might not know. While they were still in exile. He helped to draft the organization's code of conduct, and in 1990 returned to South Africa as a member of the National Executive of the ANC and the Constitutional Committee. During his time as Justice of the Constitutional Court from 1994 to 2009, Justice Sachs helped abolish the death penalty, abolish laws criminalizing homosexuality, and to legally recognize gay marriage, something we're still trying to get around to in many states here in this country. He's the author of a number of important books: Justice in South Africa from 1974, The Jail Diary of Albie Sachs, Sexism and the Law, and most recently, The Free Diary of Albie Sachs. In 1991, he won the Alan Paton Award for his book, Soft Vengeance of a Freedom Fighter. As a member of the Constitutional Court, Justice Sachs played a central role overseeing the design competition and the development, ultimately, of the art collection and integration of art into the architecture for the poignantly, actually, symbolic Constitutional Court building. This was South Africa's first major public monument of the post-apartheid era. Tonight we'll see a short film about that, featuring, I think, Dr. Sachs, and then we'll have time for, well, he'll give us a short presentation, and hopefully we'll have time for some questions and answers. So I will start the film, and then when that's done, Dr. Sachs.
The court is 3 things. It's an institution created by the Constitution to defend the basic rights of the people. It's a group of people, in our case in South Africa, South African Constitutional Court, 11 judges, and it's a building. Standing right in the heart of Constitution Square, that used to be right in the heart of the old Fort prison. Paul Kruger put up this fort in the early 1890s. He had that quaint idea the British would try and seize the goldfields, and of course they did. They failed the first time, so the Boers locked up the Brits. But the Brits won the Anglo-Boer War and they locked up the Boers. Then the Boers won political power and they locked up the blacks. And really, it's our generation that's saying it's enough of everybody locking up everybody. And that's what the Constitution means, really. We stop locking each other up. We try and find a way where we can all live together, respecting one another in the same country. And that was the foundation of our new constitutional order. The court was established in 1994 after our first democratic elections. And we had to choose a site for the permanent building of the Constitutional Court. And we chose the site of the most notorious prison in the center of Johannesburg, where we say that the previous tried, both Gandhi and Mandela were not tried. There were 4 major buildings in this complex, which afterwards became the main prison of Johannesburg, central Johannesburg. The old fort itself, the women's prison, which has now been converted into the Commission for Gender Equality. They have the headquarters there. And there's also a branch of the Human Rights Commission and other bodies set up by the Constitution to defend fundamental rights. Down here is number 4 prison, the notorious jail, where for decades, if an African man disappeared, caught without his passes when the police demanded show your pass, or out in the streets after curfew hour, or being cheeky to police, for whatever reason, this is where African men disappeared. And now the pain, that terrible energy of the past, being transformed into hope and positivity for the future. In order to create space for the Constitutional Court, so that the court wouldn't be overshadowed by the prisons, we had to demolish the awaiting trial block. But we've retained all the bricks, and we've retained 4 staircases. And they stand as almost ghostly reminders telling us we must never allow power to be used in South Africa again in a way that denies people the fundamental rights. Over here you will see this big concrete wall. It contains the name of the Constitutional Court in all the 11 official languages of the country. English looks very small actually, just below the middle, but we placed it there simply because it has fewer letters, purely for aesthetic reasons. It's no ranking. Our Constitution says that all the official languages must have parity of esteem. In practice, we use English overwhelmingly in the court, but we recognize the principle that no language is superior to any other language. The architects wanted something from the Constitution personalized, and they asked the Chief Justice Arthur Chastelson to write something rather than have formal Roman lettering, but it's rather intimidating. And he said there are 11 judges, we have 11 official languages. So we took the phrase human dignity, equality, freedom, which is central to our whole Bill of Rights, in the 11 official languages, and each one of the judges chose a language and wrote those words in that particular language. At the bottom right hand, you will see the words by my colleague Zach Yacoub. Zach is blind. He's never seen his own handwriting, and yet he learned to make out the different shapes. And interestingly enough, when we had a competition for the signage in the court, they used Zach's writing as one of the foundational shapes, together with some graffiti that they found in the old prison, together with some old street signs from this part of Johannesburg, to compose a special signage for the court. If you look at the top left-hand corner, you'll see a very, very feeble handwriting. Like a standard 2 schoolboy who's never been corrected, and that's my handwriting. And when I was blown up by a bomb put in my car when I was in exile in Mozambique by South African security agents, and I lost my right arm, my writing arm, I thought, well, at least now I'm going to learn to write with my left, and I can get a nice aristocratic writing. And I discovered that your handwriting is in your head, it's not in your hand. But at least I can say, my words are written in concrete, like literally. Again, we had a competition for the panels on the door, and the Durban artist Andrew Versteer came up with the idea of taking themes from our Bill of Rights, representing them in the different languages of the country So you find different gestures, again representing the universality of these themes that are found in our Bill of Rights. The President of the country, Mr. Thabo Mbeki, in fact inaugurated the court on Human Rights Day, 21st of March 2004. Up here we have something written in Braille. I must say it's for tall blind people. Do you feel you're in a court? Why not? It's too beautiful for a court. It's warm, it's bright, it's open, it's friendly. But why shouldn't courts be warm, beautiful, bright, open, and friendly? Especially a constitutional court that defends the basic rights of all human beings, that's there to secure human liberty. In fact, the central organizing idea of the architects was that of justice under a tree. Traditionally in Africa, people resolve their disputes under a tree, and nothing could be more open and more transparent than that. Right now, you're sitting, as it were, in a clearing in a forest. In most modern buildings, time is stolen away from us, because if it's 6 in the morning or midnight, it's the same illumination. And so we have natural light coming in, sunlight moving across the floor. On a dark day, when it's really heavy clouds outside, it can be darker inside. When the rain falls, you see the rain running down the windows. And you feel you're in a real world of climate. And if you look outside through the windows, people from outside can see in and have a sense, this is our court, we know what's going on, it's not a secret place. And those of us inside, we look out and we see our history, we see our landscape, we're in touch with the real world there. If you look at the pillars, we call them the pious pillars. The Chief Justice of South Africa, Pius Langa, was very alarmed when he saw the drawings of pillars at an angle, what in the court? But the main reason was to give that organic feel of being in a forest. When you come from the early bird of life outside, and before you get into the very rational space of the court, you need an intermediate space. Here you can see one of the staircases of the awaiting trial block where prisoners were locked up. So this very sight of people rushing up and rushing down, being murdered, almost like tackle, is now part and parcel of the court. We had a competition for an installation, and Papa George, she won the competition with this idea of the ladder of freedom next to the staircase of repression, going up through the difficulties, the travail, passing an elephant bone. Elephants represent ancient wisdom, up to the freedom of the child. And here you can see justice under a tree. This is the logo for the court, the people protecting the Constitution. Constitution shall bring the people. This, in fact, was the flag that was unveiled by President Nelson Mandela in February 1995 when the court was formally inaugurated. If there's a blonde woman in the group with a skirt, I asked her to come out and tell what it's about and to stand over this airing to give the Marilyn Monroe effect, because it demonstrates very graphically the passive cooling system that we have in the court. We don't use non-renewable energy. We use the cool night air passing over ponds and extracting rocks and then gets pumped into the building during the day. And it's not only a huge energy saver, it also creates a very pleasant climate which goes with the natural life that we have, and to create a humane environment in which we can live justice. Same tour that we ran on. She said she's been all over the world, she's been in many, many courts, she's never seen a court as wonderful as this. I think that's the way we judges all feel about the court in which we work in NIU. Can you see the ribbon of light? Again, the theme of transparency. Be not enclosed, justice is not cloistered, justice is not shut away from the world outside. I'm quite amused because when I'm sitting up on the bench there, I see the legs of people walking by. And you often can't tell if it's a man or a woman or if the person is black or white. And I'm thinking, gee, this is our non-racial, non-sexist universe that the Constitution speaks about. You can literally see humanity through the knees and the thighs and the shins coming by. At the same time, it's felt that the public shouldn't see our legs, the judges did. So they came up with the idea of the cowhide schemes. Each one from the same material, but each one distinctive. And that's what we like as a court. Each judge swears the oath to the same constitution, but we each have a life experience, a professional experience, a way of seeing the world, and we pool it all together to get the outcomes that go into our judgments. You'll notice something else when the judges are seated and the advocate, the counsel, is addressing us from this podium. Their eye level and our eye level is roughly the same. And that's to emphasize the equality under the Constitution. Another feature of the building, of course, is the use of the bricks from the older Waiting Triangle. And so the very bricks that we use to maintain oppression are now used to help guard the fundamental rights. When we inaugurated the court, we had something like 30, 40 chief justices from all over the world, and many judges from South Africa also came to attend. And my colleagues from other jurisdictions who came up here, when they saw the bricks like that, were very alarmed. They thought you'd run out of plaster. Why didn't you finish it off? And I had to explain that in fact they are historic bricks, part and parcel of the texture of the building. Now this was the time when I allow for questions about the court and our functions. Yes.
Since we achieved independence in Latin America in the 1820s, we immediately copied the constitutional systems of Europe and the United States, which means 3 branches of government. But inevitably it was the executive that imposed itself on the legislature and on the judiciary. Little by little, we were able to give greater independence to the legislature, but the judiciary still has to catch up. So what you achieved here so quickly is very, very, gives me a lot of pleasure. It's a big lesson for our country. So I'm taking this lesson and thanking you for it.
But it's all that here as well. We have to control the executive, even Parliament. And it's much, much more. We were a nation so divided at each other's throat. There's so much pain in this country. And we needed a common foundation for everybody to be able to live together. And that's in our Bill of Rights. And it's our function as a court to defend the Bill of Rights, defending the Bill of Rights, to enable the nation to come together and grow.
Can you tell us a bit about the diversity among the judges of the court?
There are 11 judges, and at least 8 of us have to sit in each case to make a quorum. It's less than 8 on the court. And at the moment, we have 3 women judges and 8 men, 1 person Indian origin, 3 people who have been classified as white in the old days, and 7 of African origin. We're going to have 2 acting judges and 2 of my colleagues go on leave the next term, and the number of women will come up to 4 before out of 11. It's not enough, and we expect in the future that there will be a much more representative balance. This is the reception area where you And again, it's a totally different part of the building, but has that equal sense of delight and openness and transparency. These carpets are based on little pieces that were taken out of paintings sent in to us by an artist in Durban. And it didn't work as a painting, but there were details that were just so strongly evocative that the architect saw the possibilities, enlarged them, made the pattern, and they were sent out to cooperative weavers in the countryside. And she said it was quite astonishing. The women were sitting on high stools, the big looms in front of them. The branches to make the looms were so fresh, there were still little twigs and leaves sticking out of them. And below on the ground, there were chickens and dogs and pigs running around. And these absolutely exquisite carpets that ran all the way through the building emerged from that process. We now find ourselves in the judges' conference room. This really is the brains of the whole enterprise for the Constitutional Court of South Africa. And you'll see we have a table, not very completely round, it's slightly irregular, just to show the freedom and the openness of the discussion that we have when we analyze the cases. And then up on the walls at the top, these are representations of some of the oldest surviving artworks in the world. They are copies of rock engravings made in the Northern Cape. And so they're much older even than the very ancient rock paintings. This part of the building is constructed on the gallery principle. Again, in most modern buildings, you just have floors and corridors and anonymous doors leading off. And it dehumanizes people that just locked up in their cubicles. And also disempowers visitors that come, they don't know where to go. Here it's open. But it's more than just the friendliness of it. The sense of community is very strong. So I can see colleagues when they're walking down below, and I can wave to them. And that's part of the African quality of this building. Another part is the use of wood in the ceilings and these woven chandeliers, reminiscent of fish traps, of beer strainers. When we come past this, look at the doors. We have a competition for designs, and each one is a bit forward, so it's very secure, but you also can see through a little bit, and each one is different. So you don't get too much regularity making it appear that all the judges are made in a sausage factory. We are real people, and we have to each have our own individual consciences in relation to the work that we do, and some of that symbolized by these doors. This is my office, which we call my chambers, characteristically untidy, because I spend too much time taking people on tours and not enough setting up my tables. There is a basic equipment of furniture that we can arrange it as we want, and we have some choice over colour. We have these big white screens. They really just do absorb sound and prevent too much echo. And I found them too harsh. They reminded me of the interrogation cells that happens in Kliptown. And so I got my son to do these very light murals, and the architects, and were willing to accept, provided I could encourage other judges to have murals painted. somehow there's a link between the excitement of knowledge and the physical spaces that function here. We started literally without one book, so we had to build up a library from scratch. It's become what's said to be the biggest human rights library in the Southern Hemisphere. I think even more important than that, we're developing a strong virtual capacity. We want to become a hub to begin with for the whole of Southern Africa, so that all the legal people throughout up to the equator can get materials from us. We speak a lot about NEPAD, the importance of development in Africa according to contemporary concepts of rule of law, but if people don't have the instruments, it's so much more difficult for them to do so. Our library then becomes a facility for democrats throughout the African continent, and we will link up with other libraries in Cairo and in Dakar and West Africa to create that kind of facility. Over there you can see Hillbrow. It's become probably the most urban setting in Africa. People from all over the continent are there. And they speak all the languages, they eat the foods, they wear the clothes. People flocking here because of the economic activity. Up this way you see the beautiful northern suburbs, not a poor person in sight. And then round the corner is what I call bureaucratic Bloemfontein. And what happens here is the three Johannesburgs meet on Constitution Hill. We needed some kind of protection for this wall, and the competition was won by an architect, metal sculptor, Louis Rabin, working with an artist, Patrick Cork. And they came up with this idea of loose metal screens, each one carrying some representation, punctured, so that you could see through that sense of transparency of the building from inside and outside being maintained. And instead of having heavy grills here that looking like another prison, it would have a kind of liberated feel about it. Traditionally in Africa, in Asia, Latin America, buildings are built on the courtyard principle. They're open to the sky. You're in touch with nature. You're not enclosed. You're not trapped in a box. We had a competition for that particular wall, and the artist, sculptor Wilbur Cruz, came up with this idea of simply quoting from Nelson Mandela on trial for his life. At the end of the famous speech that he made, when he didn't know if he was going to be hanged or not, and he ended up with the words, "It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve, but if needs be, it is an ideal for which I'm prepared to die." And those are the last words that the public heard from Nelson Mandela for 27 years. Here we have a rather remarkable installation. It's by the artist Willem Bossel. And if you look here, you'll see groups of 6 with a stripe through it. That is the number of weeks that Nelson Mandela spent in prison. 11th of June 1964 to the 11th of February 1990, 9,377 days. If you move down to the next one, Walter Sisulu, and so you'll find that all the Rivonia prisoners, as they were called, have the number of days they spent in prison recorded here. My friend Dennis Goldberg, we were in the same youth movement together in Kliptown, and being white, he wasn't locked up on Robben Island with the other accused, because there was segregation even of the people regarded as traitors according to race. He was sent to Pretoria and had that extra penalty of being on his own for much of that time. I took him round here one day. I didn't prepare him for this call, and he was very emotional when he saw that in this compact and non-triumphant way, very simple, very expressive way, the dedication of so much of his life to the freedom struggle in South Africa. amazing how he collected it, 10,000 rand, and the love and the support of the arts community, the artists, the galleries, the sculptors, the painters, wanting to show the appreciation of new democracy in South Africa, and very generously donating their works, we built up this collection. If you look up, you can see the nosings. They mark the edge of the step. They are moles done by an African woman potter. And when the sun is shining and you look up, it's like fireflies. And what would have otherwise been just a boring corridor becomes a lovely little art in itself. Here you see the story of the making of the Constitution. We've tried to give something of the idea. This Constitution didn't just come from the minds of a few smart lawyers doing a deal with one another. It emerged very much from the history and huge participation. When the final draft was being worked on, Parliament went out and canvassed opinions throughout the country. And that's one reason why the Constitution has so much prestige in South Africa today. People feel it's their Constitution, but they had a stake, a role in its production. And it's not something alien to them or just a beautiful piece of paper that was waved to try and distract people from harsh conditions in which they live. We don't have time to consider all the artwork that's here, but one really has to stop at the blue dress. It's become possibly the best known art feature in the building. Judith Mason was listening to the Truth Commission on the radio, and she heard the story of the discovery of a body of an African woman freedom fighter, Gorilla, in Montego-Seasburg, the convent of the ANC. And her naked body was found in a shallow grave, and the only covering she had was a little bit of blue plastic bag over the private part. And Judith went out, and she bought 2 plastic bags, and she sold this dress for the person she called my sister. And this is what she wrote on the dress. Sister, a plastic bag may not be the whole armor of God, but you are wrestling with flesh and blood and against the rulers of darkness, against spiritual wickedness in sordid places. Your weapons were your silence and a piece of rubbish. At some level you shamed your captors, and they did not compound the abuse of you by stripping you a second time, yet they killed you. You only know your story because a sneering man remembered how brave you were. Memorials to your courage are everywhere. They blow about in the streets, drift on the tide, and cling to thorn bushes. This dress is made from something, Ambagashi, quote. In 1976, at the time of the Soweto uprising, artists throughout the world in South Africa were drawing pictures of troops throwing stones, burning buildings, police firing tear gas. My friend, the artist Albie Sach, took this drawing, the homage of the musician, of the poet, of the painter, to the sacrificed youth. And he quotes the poem of Papa Neruda. And why do your poems not speak of the leaves and volcanoes of the naked land? Come and see the blood in the streets. Come and see the blood in the streets. Come and see the blood in the streets. That's what's written there. That's not what he drew. He drew the compassion, the tenderness, the respect, the honor of the artist, the musician, the painter, the poet, for the people who died. Being great South African theatre director, Albie Sach, once said, almost angrily to me, why don't you draw oppression and resistance in this country? And as he was saying that, a gang of African prisoners, probably on their way to number 4 prison, came by. Why don't you draw that? And at that very moment, a nurse came by high, and the men lifted their hats, and the leader said, that's what I want to draw. To me, that captures the spirit of Ubuntu. Ubuntu meaning, I am a person because you are a person. I can separate my humanity and place in the world from an understanding of and a connection with your humanity. We are individuals whose personal richness comes from acknowledging the richness and the rights of other people. And the reason why we have a constitution and a Bill of Rights today in South Africa is not because of the wonderful Mandela and the wise decade. They played an important role. The body chemistry, in fact, is bad. It was that cultural spirit amongst millions and millions of ordinary oppressed people living with hope, living with a vision of a world where we could come together as South Africans. That's the foundation of our Bill of Rights and of our Constitution. And so it's in honouring Dumile, we honour the principle of Ubuntu. And those of us sitting up on the bench are then trying to apply these values and principles through the text of the Constitution in the way we resolve the cases that come before us. Thank you.
I must say it's especially exciting for me to see this film at the School of Architecture. I've shown it all over the world to every kind of audience, school children, and people just like the building and they like the pictures and they like the stories. But I think the strongest response I get is from architects. And I think something just happened. The architects who won our competition said they felt they were vehicles. That it was just a moment in our history. The support of the arts community, anything was possible. And when Joe Noeru, one of our top architects, launched the book that he did on the architecture and the artwork in the building, he said this was the building he'd been dreaming of since he was a student, because this was the building that captured the Bauhaus vision better than any other building that he knows. Gee, we did that in South Africa. The land of apartheid, the land of backwardness and division and hatred. And yet I suppose it was the very spirit of opposing all those things and coming together created that intensity of imagination and willingness and desire and eagerness to do something better. And if there's one theme in this building, it's that you don't forget the past. You don't say, let's move on, let bygones be bygones. You embrace the past, but in a way where you're turning it around. You're taking the negativity that's so real, those emotions that are buried in that prison, and they're still there, but you convert and transform those very emotions into positivity. I often had that image of a waterfall. The water is plunging down relentlessly, and you have a turbine at the bottom, and it captures that energy and it whirls around, and beauty and light comes out of it. We had to deal with the past in other ways. What should justice be like in the new South Africa? What should our building be like? And we had a competition. We'd chosen this site. We were taken to the Midrand, beautiful, upmarket, high-tech commercial area, halfway between Pretoria and Johannesburg. They put on a great display for us. We said, thank you, but no thank you. We could have had a very elegant, beautiful building that might have won architectural competitions there. But what would people say? We need business. Business has a huge role to play in South Africa. But if our building looks like business and it's cheek by jowl with business, people would say they all belong together. What hopes can the ordinary poor people have? The people who come to clean those buildings, the bricklayers who lay the bricks for those buildings, can they feel that they're going to get justice in that building? Will they understand us? Will they understand what being a human being means to us? We chose the site of the old prison. Sometimes it's wonderful to start with nothing. Normally when you take over an old building, new constitution, new judges, new values, the building is telling its own stories. If there are any images at all in an old court, they will be pictures of dead white male judges. Now one day I'm going to be a dead white male judge. There's nothing wrong with that. But if that's the only story you see, it's saying only men mattered, only whites mattered. So a simple thing like that, that little relic of the past, is actually telling a bitter and a sad story. So the advantage we had was we could create ourselves, invent ourselves. And that logo that you saw was fundamental. Thinking back, I was amazed to see how vital, it's like the little acorn. Because from very early on, we couldn't bear to use the old logo. It was quite an elegant design. It wasn't racist. It had I think, a lion and some kind of springbok on the other side. Little African touches, European heraldry. But that was the stamp of death sentences, of forced removals, and the idea that we could send out our letters using the seal of apartheid was just too much for us. So we decided we needed a new seal, a new logo. But what should it be? And we rejected the blindfolded woman. We fought so hard for our justice, for our constitution, for our rights. Why should we copy a symbol that nobody quite understands? We rejected the idea of a building like your Supreme Court, which in a way is a copy of an idealized version of not quite Greek and not quite Roman, but to make Americans feel civilized, we'll have this elegant classical building. If we'd had a copy of a copy of a copy, it would have been betraying the effort that our generation put in to get our new constitution. So we wanted a building that would be ours and reflect our imagination. But who were us? Who were we? A diverse population with diverse histories, diverse images important to their background. What should the basic design be? In any event, we came up with this logo of, we couldn't decide, should it be a tree, organic, growing, rooted, or should it be people, the human being, human dignity? And somebody who happened to be visiting the Chief Justice said, why don't you combine the two? He went back to London and we got our logo. But that became the foundation, that tiny little acorn, justice under a tree. And once we'd chosen the site, we had an international competition, we set up a jury, and the most important people on the jury turned out to be the lay people. We had Jeffrey Bawa from Sri Lanka, a wonderful, a passionate, inventive architect in the modernist tradition, but a kind of regional modernism. Charles Correa was the head of the jury from Mumbai and MIT then. Peter Davey, the editor of the British Architectural Review, and then various South Africans, and representing heritage and the architectural and building professions, and myself on behalf of the judges, and the mayor of Johannesburg, Isaac Makhasi, who'd been locked up in number 4 prison. And he said if he had told the guards that one day he'll be the mayor of Johannesburg, awarding the prize for the best building for the new constitutional court, he said they would have killed him. And then Tenji Mtenso, she was head of the Gender Commission, Commission for Gender Equality. The building literally flies over the old women's jail. And Tenji said, why have you put me on the jury? You saw there were only men, and she was right. So he said, let the head of the Gender Commission come on, and she became the most important member of the jury. She said, what would my mother want to see? What kind of building? Her mother was an African woman, little schooling, took in washing from white families, saving to send her daughter to school and university. And my mother would say, I want a building. What's the face of the building? Is it smiling or is it frowning? And for most people in South Africa, overwhelmingly, the buildings were frowning. They were saying, go around the back, or if you come in here, make sure you're well dressed and well behaved, and you're very submissive to the people who are in charge of the building. And Tenji, we looked through, it was an international competition, a blind competition, number 74 or 83 or whatever it was, justice under a tree. That was their theme. Eventually we opened the envelope, and Herbert Prince from the Heritage Foundation was so thrilled. He'd heard of these young architects from Durban. So it wasn't just a second-year student. I was going to say, sorry if there are any second-year students here, but I see hardly any students here, who might have won a competition which he or she wouldn't be able to manage. We had a great relationship with the architects. The selection was with a caveat. There were some features of the building that we felt were incomplete. And the understanding was that they would consult with the professionals on the jury and with the judges to deal with those matters. The architect on the jury said, you can't do that. You award the contract to the architects and then it's theirs. We said, look, this is the new South Africa. And these were young Durban architects who were used to doing work in the community, used to discussion, debate. They welcomed it. And quite a few changes were made as a result of those consultations. And as they were working, all sorts of design features came in. Even the incorporation of the staircases was done when they discovered they were going to have one huge roof, a canopy over, that it was just physically impossible from an engineering point of view to do that. And so they had separate roofing, and that made it possible to keep the staircases, which have now become such an integral part of the building. We had $2,000 for the artworks. When we started off with one chair and 10 borrowed chairs in temporary accommodation, the Chief Justice gave out different tasks, the rules of the court, the library, a thing called computers, the gown, and Yvonne Machoro and Albie Sachs were left with nothing. And he said, can we look after decor? And we got 10,000 Rand, then worth about $2,000. We bought one tapestry with that. But look what you can do with $2,000. All you need is the right time in history, a huge amount of chutzpah, and then also the love and the support of the building community, the builders, the architects. The builders had a wonderful time. They did things with concrete they'd never done before. And they tried it out, and one wall actually collapsed. It's not in the film. But they recovered from that. And then it was a collection that collected itself. We had no money. I would open an exhibition, I would drop a big hint, that artist X had donated, William Kentridge had given us that one piece. I met Marlene Dumas in the Netherlands and told her the story about the building, and she said she had something we might be interested in. We went along, and I remember looking in these huge cigar boxes where I could just see the corner of the tapestries that are up there, something that she'd made for a court in Holland, and I just knew straight away that would be wonderful. And then people sometimes offered, if I traveled anywhere, I would bring back what I could. I went to some function in New York and I met a guy who was married to a granddaughter of Chagall. And without going through all the details, 10 years later we got 3 Chagall lithographs. So they say every picture tells 1,000 stories, there's 1,000 stories about every picture. But it gave a kind of strange, serendipitous, wonderfully hybrid quality to the artwork that we have. It wasn't just a purchasing committee with either the strongest person or the richest person determining everything, or you can only get agreement with the lowest common denominator, boring stuff. And so it's this very, very unusually diverse art that we have. I loved working there. I think all my colleagues loved working there. Advocates enjoy going there. I'm not sure if clients who lose their cases appreciate the architecture as much as we do. And I wouldn't say the brilliance of the outcomes can be attributed to the architecture. I think architects would love to feel that the South African court decided to legalize same-sex marriages because of the marvelous enlightened design of the building. But it's all part and parcel of humanizing our project. And I think that's something that we've really managed to achieve with that building. And that's why it gives me so much joy to communicate with people. Maybe some of you sometimes feel a little bit down, you know, that maybe when you were younger you had passion and commitment and belief, and you find grandiosity or commercial things or whatever it might be seem to just take over and submerge everything. Well, all I can say is there are moments when a lot of those ancient and modern dreams, things can come together. And can I tell you what, I hope I can come back here again, and I hope I can share this experience. And if we can regard this as a sort of an aperitif, a trailer, I'd just love to communicate, because you've got a great School of Architecture. I first heard about you from Diane Girardo, who came like a tornado to Cape Town, and she was tremendous there, and she helped put you on the map in our imaginations. And let's say this is just a stepping stone to further encounters. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. You've got a great film and a great building. You want to get on a plane and go there right away.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
You really do. You really do. But what a story. Questions? And I don't think I have to. If you're a few enough people, you could.
Huge respect for your past and what you've done. It's a very big privilege to hear you talk. Let me ask you a probing question, because I think that's a lot of respect too. I've thought a lot about the relationship between architecture and politics, and it's a very difficult terrain. Here in the States, here in the States, much of the country was carpeted with a grid system. The idea that cities, if the city laid out in a grid, then they would be democratic. But the grid was used also for the concentration camp, probably also for Robben Island. Back in ancient Greece, the column was developed. But the column was used by Albert Speer and by the Nazis in the 1930s, 40s and so on. There are a lot of attempts to try and sort of present an architecture of, say, democracy. But much of it relies on mere symbolism. you have to know what they mean. As Frederick Jameson, the American cultural theorist, once said, architecture is inert, and the meaning is allegorical. You need to know the story. Someone's got to tell you the story, as in this particular case. And you could even argue that architecture...
Just stop a minute. Could you bring me the chair? Sorry.
You could even argue that architectural form is also irrelevant in a sense. I mean, if you think when Nelson Mandela stepped across the threshold of the Union buildings in Pretoria, he transformed a building, or he recoded a building that was associated with apartheid and transformed it into another type of building. It's almost like the way we project associations onto buildings is really dependent on what happens in the building. And for example, and you can take that further, there was a Polish-Canadian artist called Krzysztof Wojcicki who projected onto South Africa House in London during the time of apartheid, projected a swastika onto the house. And a very significant gesture, kind of meaning that the associations that we had at the time with the South African government were kind of like the Nazis in a way. And so there's a lot of kind of like, there's a sort of question mark about this. There's some comments made by, I don't know if you know him, there's a French historian of ideas called Michel Foucault, who writes about the panopticon, about a device, the prison in a way, that is designed for controlling the prisoners. There's a central space in the middle where the guard can look, and all the cells are arranged radially so they can guard and see everything. But the prisoners don't know if the guard is watching or not, therefore they remain under potential suspense.
Is it again a question?
Yes, okay.
Let's,
so,
because other people I think would like to ask questions.
Right, okay. But his comment was really, was that form is irrelevant in the situation. The practice of freedom is freedom itself. So, in a way, and all he says is basically architectural form can maybe inhibit or encourage certain practices, certain spatial practices, but no more than that. Isn't it, if we leave it all to symbolism, to what things might mean, what stories are, is that going to really give us an architecture of democracy? Aren't there limitations about using symbolism?
Okay, if you think symbolism is going to do everything, then you're completely mistaken. And it's possible in that very building to have authoritarian judges who turned a blind eye to all sorts of negative things. But it does facilitate dialogue, transparency, openness, recognition. In our country, to feel you're in a building where you are welcome, it's more than just comfort. When people have been pushed out, driven off the land, their houses have been bulldozed, when people get them to come and put up the buildings, and then they can only come in as cleaners, to feel this is a building where I'm welcome, where I don't feel intimidated, where I can see what's going on, where I learned words like legible, legible architecture, buildings that talk. When I opened my ears very much, I never actually heard buildings talking to each other, but I was told the prison speak to the other building. A lot happens at the subliminal level. And in a country with damaged psyches and damaged memories, anything that has a knitting, healing, positive, evocative function is useful. I wouldn't put it beyond that. I can tell you that delight is something that you feel when you come to the building. And I remember Jeffrey Bauer saying, he's a functionalist, but he said delight is a function. To make a building beauty is not anti-functional, it's part of the function. That sense of, one of the big problems we had was how to make a building for Africa. And the one entry for the competition had 3 huge round concrete huts that looked like a copy of an African design. And it had a certain superficial attraction, and that's great for a theme park or a game reserve. It would have been horrid for the court. And that was rejected by the jury. The other very common thing is to put up an international style building that could be anywhere, and then you fill it with elephant tusks and murals and paintings and drums. And I think Charles Correa hated that more than anything. In India, you'd get a building that would have been excellent for Toronto, and then people would paint some Mughal turrets in it and some Hindu temples, and that's a pastiche. What we went for was that theme of justice under a tree. Not literally, but that sense of participation, of openness, of welcome. And visitors are amazed. They come to our court, and you were just saying to me yesterday, there is security when you come in, but you don't feel you're going into a fortress. You feel welcome. That's important for visitors from America. It's much more important for visitors from Soweto to feel that justice is something that's open to them. And then when you're in the foyer, you know you're in a foyer. When you go into the court, you know you're in a court. You go down the corridor, it's a corridor. The library looks like a library. The admin part, so that's where the legibility comes in. The African quality comes in terms of the openness, the connection, the being able to wave to each other. African villages are built on that principle. It also comes in with the little details, the chandeliers hanging like fish traps. You won't find any elephant tusks in our building. There are no obvious pastiche paintings to say, in case you've forgotten, you're in Africa. The light coming in, that bit of the courtyard principle, but especially that sense of community. These are the African qualities that actually modernism allows for and facilitates if you can get it right. So these were the themes that we worked with. And from a purely functional point of view, in terms of at least democratic comfort and accessibility and inclusion, which are important democratic principles, I can say the building facilitates all that. In terms of memory, extremely important. We're right next to the jail. And it's a reminder to everybody, never again. Why do we have a constitution? That this isn't a citadel up on the hill representing the state power. You know, if I go into an ordinary small court somewhere, I'm feeling guilty, and I'm a judge. It's like the very structure of the building says, we know what you've done, we're on to you. And we wanted to destroy that. It's all part and parcel of these processes of humanizing our society and enhancing the sense of human dignity. The choice of art. Well, beggars can't be choosers, but beggars can have a discernment. The only art that we didn't go for and look for, it's a very important part of art, is art that denounces. The kind of art we produced a lot in the anti-apartheid era, but we couldn't have denunciatory art in the court. People go there to be protected. Even some very beautiful feminist, powerful feminist drawings that we had, we decided not to take them because we have lots of cases dealing with patriarchy. And if it looks from your symbols as though, okay, these people are all lined up on the side of the feminists, and if I happen to be a man, or I'm defending a law that somehow is alleged to be pro the male elders, I'm not going to get a fair hearing. We excluded work like that. We looked for work with the human body as being central because we're defending fundamental human rights. So we weren't going for, there's a very beautiful court, the Moakley Court in Boston, which Stephen Breyer says is one of the 5 great courts in the world, together with our court, the Jerusalem Supreme Court, the Federal Court of Appeal in Australia, which I've been to, and then a court in Bordeaux, which I haven't seen. He elevates the court that he helped to supervise to the pantheon of 5. Now, where was I starting on that? The human body. So in the Moakley Court in Boston, Federal Court of Appeal, they've only got Ellsworth Kelly. They're very beautiful, they're very lovely. But I said, you know, you've got beautiful walls and spaces. They've got lots of stuff carved in stone outside, quotations from Holmes and Cardozo and so on. It's nice, you know, it's okay, but doesn't compare with the handwriting, with artwork that's ambiguous. These are good. It's a little bit like the post office, you know, through the rain and the snow, we judges will ensure that justice will be done, justice will be delivered. And I asked, why don't you have any artwork? And, excuse my accent, and I was told, we Americans can agree on iconography. Now, we didn't agree on iconography. We trusted the artworks, the art. It's the very diversity. There isn't a single message. The only message is that people are talented, vibrant, see the world differently, use textures. We had work by very famous artists, Marlene Dumas, William Kentridge, Willem Boshoff. People don't even know they're artists. And somehow it's that diversity that gives a texture. The part that I'm most attracted by, that I remember the strongest, is what we call the integrated artworks. Those were the security doors, the chandeliers, the carpets, things that every building needs. But we decided that we would put it all out for competition and get that national investment in the building. People are very proud that their carpet, their whatever it is in that building. But people coming there also see things that they feel comfortable with, that are familiar. They can't say why, but they feel comfortable there. So I would agree with you. I would love to believe that great, beautiful, humane architecture produces great, beautiful, humane leaders and great, wonderful, humane decisions. It doesn't. And I don't think our jurisprudence got any better when we moved from one rather ordinary building into this beautiful building. So I think that's a very strong and good caution that you gave, that not to hold up too much promise in terms of what space and place can do for humanity. It's not a substitute. It's not a substitute at all. But I think it is a product of intense imagination, of feeling. It gets communicated. And together with lots of other things, it can be very valuable. If somebody asks me about what we are leaving behind, our first generation of judges, I think our decisions, abolishing capital punishment, recognizing same-sex marriages, allowing prisoners to vote, a whole range of things are important. But I also like to feel this building, this space, and it's important in itself, and it's important for what it's not. It's not your overpowering, domineering, ornate building saying, we are in power, we are in charge. I think it has a symbolism that goes beyond simply the use to which it's put. It's presenting an alternative, a dialogic alternative, a warm alternative, an inventive alternative to what the meaning of power is in the society. But now that would be expecting too much, that we would have a great president and a wonderful parliament because we've got this wonderful building. But I see it's all part and parcel of we captured the moment as well as we could. And I think it's of definite, emphatic value. I thought you were going to ask me, a lot of people ask me, with so much poverty, so many people homeless, is it right to spend money on buildings like that? And my answer is, are you saying the poor are not interested in beauty? That the poor only want shelter over their heads? That human dignity means nothing to the poor? Poor are aching for it. We have people coming from their shacks to court. The very last case that we heard dealt with pit latrines, not far from the center of Johannesburg. And were they compatible with human dignity as protected in the Constitution? And the people walked to the court, they were sitting there, they were recognized, and we felt that they felt comfortable in that building. And then it also encouraged the judges speaking to them, to speak to them in a friendly way, not like important, witty, powerful figures up there. So in that sense, I would say that we feel it's a project that exceeded our hopes in terms of, you know, that marvelous thing when you see a building, when it's actually up, and you feel the architects weren't just over-enthusiastic, that it's even better than they were saying.
Albie, one thing that I've experienced in being in the court,
Can the people hear?
in visiting the court, I remember the first time I, as a young person hearing about apartheid and getting involved with the movement, and I think when we started to interact with South Africans, what we discovered was, despite all this incredible oppression, there were people, activists, Desmond Tutu, who would joke, and he was funny, and the protest music, instead of being dirge-like, had this rollicking joy to it, where you listen, you hear Hugh Masekela singing about, his protests, and yet you could hear in his music sort of what he envisioned coming after apartheid. And this isn't a question, it's just a statement, but what I experienced in walking into the court was there was a rollicking, almost wildness to it, where you feel like, oh, what's going on here isn't like anything else that's going on anywhere else in the world. This is a brand new thing. We are doing something brand new and different. And you are in the Constitution itself, but it's embodied in the building. And I have to think to some degree, the environment itself does help feed that sense that this isn't a copy of what we're America. This isn't, it is very uniquely African and very uniquely South African. So,
to make it a question then, people say, do you agree?
And do you agree?
I agree.